Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Living Library. Today we have a picture book. I'm not sure that that's what we would call this. It is a Caldecott winner and our honor, so we know if it has a Caldecott Honor Award. The illustrations, and this is by Robert Lawson, that is who illustrated it. It won that award. So for illustration. Now I went to go see when this book was written. Let me show you some of the illustrations. And these are all black and white illustrations, by the way. And I wondered about that, and that it's all black and white. And even the illustrations seem simple, but yet it's an honorary awarded book for illustrations. So I went to go see when the book was written. By the way, this book is called Wee, W-E-E, Wee Gillis. It was written the year my father was born, 1938. Right, oh gosh, you guys will have to check me on this. Was that before or after? Right after the Second World War, right during the Depression for our country. Anyways, a long time ago. And that kind of surprised me. So we're going to read it. It is called Wee Gillis, W-E-E as his first name, and Gillis. Can you see already what this book might be about? Where is this guy from? Well, let's read it. Let's see what this book is all about from 1938. Wee Gillis lived in Scotland. Can you see him way down there? His real name was Alistair Roderick Craiglachie Dalhousie Gowan Donny Bristol Macmac. But that took too long to say, so everyone just called him Wee Gillis. Let me say that name again because I think it was fun. Here we go. Alistair Roderick Craiglachie Dalhousie Gowan Donny Bristol Macmac. Wow. His mother's relations were all lowlanders. They stayed down in the valleys and raised long-haired cows. His father's relations were all Highlanders. They stayed up in the hills and stalked stags. Wee Gillis didn't know which he wanted to be, a lowlander or a Highlander. His mother's relations all thought that his father's relations were very foolish to run and climb and creep around the hills stalking stag. His father's relations all thought that his mother's relations were very silly to drive and call and milk their long-haired cows. Wee Gillis didn't know, but he watched them both and he was cheerful and amiable. Let me get that. There we go. So for 1 year, he went to live in the lowlands with his mother's relations. Every day he rose early and ate a large bowl of oatmeal. Then he drove the long-haired cows out along the valleys, and at night he called and called them and drove them home again in time for his mother's relations to milk them. Once he was late in getting them home. Then the relations all asked what had kept him, and he had to tell them that the cows wouldn't come when he called. Then the relations all said that he didn't shout loud enough and that the cows couldn't hear him through the heavy mist. So every night when the mists would come down over the valley, Wee Gillis would shout a little louder than he had before. That was fine for his lungs, and by the end of the year, they were very, very strong. On the first day of the new year, Wee Gillis went up to the Highlands. And every day he rose early and ate a large bowl of oatmeal with his father's relations. Then he set out walking and crawling and running and creeping all over the hills, stalking stag. He would hide behind thistles and sit under the heather, and sometimes he would have to be so quiet for hours at a time that you would have thought he was a stone. Once while he was stalking, he sighed a big sigh because he had stayed still for so long, and the noise that it made frightened a stag so that it ran away. Then the relations all told Wee Gillis that he didn't keep quiet enough and that he must learn to hold his breath. So day after day, sitting among the thistles and on the heather, Wee Gillis would hold his breath longer and longer to keep from sighing so he wouldn't frighten the stags. Well, that was fine for his lungs, and by the end of the year, they were very, very strong. So year in, year out, Wee Gillis would take turns calling the cows in the lowlands and stalking the stags in the highlands, and all the while his lungs grew stronger and stronger. At last the day came when he must make up his mind and decide forever which to be, a lowlander who called cows or a highlander who stalked stags. Bright and early in the morning there were 2 loud knocks on his door. When he opened it, there stood his Uncle Andrew from the lowlands and his Uncle Angus from the highlands. Gillis put on his kilt in a hurry, and away they went out into the morning. They walked and walked, not saying a word, down through the valley and up over the hills until they found just the right spot for deciding. Then his Uncle Andrew and his Uncle Angus stopped and stood very still, and they turned to Wee Gillis. He was exactly halfway up the side of the medium-sized hill, not in the lowlands and not in the highlands, just in the middle, and he had to choose forever. Gillis looked down and Gillis looked up. Then he looked at his uncles and they began to talk. First they pleaded and then they begged very softly and very quietly, one at a time, and they politely waited for each to finish what they had to say before the other began. But still, Wee Gillis could not decide. So the uncles' voices grew louder and louder, and they didn't wait for each other to finish talking anymore, but shouted and screamed and yelled until they jumped up and down and stamped their feet. Wow, they are just upset. You could hear them shouting all over, all the way down in the valleys and all the way up the hills. Suddenly, his uncle stopped jumping and shouting because a very large man had come up behind them. He was carrying something brown and big, but he put it down beside a rock, and then he looked at Wee Gillis, and then at Uncle Andrew, and then at Uncle Angus. And when they were all quiet, he sat down on a rock. He picked up a big brown thing that looked like a sack with sticks on it and took a deep breath and puffed his cheeks and shut his eyes and blew into one end of it with all his might. But nothing happened. He shook his head sadly and tried again, but nothing happened. And then he was very sad. And he said so. He was almost ready to cry because he was a bagpiper. And he had just made these fine new bagpipes to play on, but he had made them too big, and he didn't have enough breath to blow. Uncle Andrew was very sorry for him, so he tried to blow, but he couldn't. Uncle Angus was sorry for him too, so he tried to blow, but he couldn't. So they all sat down on rocks and were all sad together. Wee Gillis wished that his uncles would ask him to try, but they didn't. So he just stood and looked as though he would like to. After a long time, the large man noticed him and shook his head slowly. But because Wee Gillis looked so wanting to, the large man asked him if he would like to. Wee Gillis said, "Aye." And so he did. First, he took a deep breath the way he used to when he was to call the cows on a misty night in the lowlands. Then he held it the way he used to when he was sitting very still, stalking stag in the highlands. And then he blew with all the force in his very, very strong lungs. The bag filled up and let out a screech through every one of its pipes. And the large man and Uncle Andrew and Uncle Angus fell off the rocks in surprise. Look at that bag. Woo, it's a big one. So the large man taught him how to make music, and now Wee Gillis is welcome down in the lowlands and up in the highlands. But most of the time, he just stays in his house, halfway up the side of the mountain, halfway up the side of a medium-sized hill, and plays the biggest bagpipes in all of Scotland. And it is the end. All right. Wee Gillis making some hard decisions, ultimately not being the decision at all that everybody thought he would make. What did he do? He did the thing that called to his heart, and that's a nice thing. So we'll see you next time.